Investment is going to take a little bit of a change to move to the next level, and so at that point we looked for partners, strategic partners, and Foodtastic came in and bought out all of my other partners, and I'm left happily.
Welcome everybody, we're so excited. We're here at Big Rig Brewery's Canada location today to kick off our first episode of the Ottawa Craft Beer Insider Podcast. It's an exciting time for Big Rig with the news that it had been acquired by a Quebec company. Sounds like there's big things in the works for them in terms of an expansion. And we're excited to have our first guest for the podcast, Lon Liddell, the co-owner and brewmaster here at Big Rig, who is going to help us understand the story of Big Rig, where it's been, and where it's going. Welcome to our first podcast, the Ottawa Craft Beer Insider Podcast, and such a pleasure to be here at Big Rig's Canada location with Lon Liddell, co-owner now, and brewmaster.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for being our first guest, and I guess
Pleasure.
That's a great kicking off point right there is the news in June that Big Rig had been acquired by Foodtastic in Quebec.
Yep.
And it sounds like big and exciting plans for Big Rig. So maybe before we get to where Big Rig came from, maybe you can talk for a minute about where Big Rig is going now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's we've had this location open for about 5 years now. And with the bringing in of new partners, definitely has shifted how the future looks for us. And so it's awesome. With driving the brewery aspect, there's only so far I could take it.
Yeah.
And so bringing in these new partnership group allows more opportunity for how we're going to change and do business in the future. So Foodtastic, to give you a little bit of background, Foodtastic is a restaurant company. So they specialize in finding brands that are successful and opening more restaurants. And so really that's one of the main things that you'll see with our new partnership is more Big Rig restaurants opening throughout the province and probably throughout Canada. So they've got in Quebec, they've got over 60 store locations of different restaurant concepts, and so I think the plan in the next 6 to 8 months is to open up 5 more Big Rig restaurants in Ontario.
Wow.
Or no, sorry, three in Ontario, 3 to 4 in Ontario, and two in Quebec. So really, they're a fast-moving company, and so as far as the craft beer side, it's always nice to have another sales avenue. So to be able to expand your product, sell them in your own retail locations is a massive win.
Now I can give a bit of an endorsement to Foodtastic, because one of the stores that they have in Quebec is Belle de Boeuf, and that has become one of my go-to spots when I go to Montreal to cover hockey. They have a location on St. Catherine Street, down near Guy, and I can recommend it. It's a great experience. Obviously, by the name, hamburgers are the specialty.
Yeah.
Now it'll even be better to be able to go in there and have some Big Rig product, get the best of the Quebec hamburger and the Ontario beer.
Yeah.
Now, it's a great story. It's a great local story here in Ottawa. Take us back to the origins of Big Rig and back in 2012 and how even the whole concept of Big Rig came together.
Yeah, myself and my family, my wife moved to Ottawa probably about 9 or 10 years ago now, and the goal was to be here for a couple of years for some family reasons. Within about 6 months, I was getting antsy, and I was lucky enough to meet a couple of my former partners. They're in the restaurant business with the Baton Rouge chains. So good restaurant people, solid people. And then basically from there, they had a couple of contacts, one of them being Chris Phillips and one of our other partners. And so there's the 5 of us in ownership. And so from there, we started the Iris. We looked for a location, we found the Iris spot, built it up, put in the brew pub system there. Yeah. And really at that time, craft beer in Ottawa and even Ontario was really at its beginning stage. I mean, when I moved to town, there was Clock Tower, which is a fantastic brand, and Bose was around, and then there was Heritage Brewing Company out in Carleton Place. So I started brewing in 1996. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And so basically at the end of the day, I had to create my own job. And so joining forces with great restaurant people and local celebrity Chris Phillips was a natural. It was a great fit. I didn't have to think about restaurant operations, just need to focus on beer, which is really truly my passion. Yeah. So yeah, from there the goal was to open up the Canada facility and the East End location of Blair Ogilvie within 2 to 3 years, and we hit those marks. And then my goal was to build out our production facility within a couple of years, and so basically hit all of our targets. And then at that point, it was like, okay, well, what's next? It's going to take some investment. It's going to take a little bit of a change to move to the next level. And so at that point, we looked for partners, strategic partners, and Foodtastic came in and bought out all of my other partners, and I'm left happily still doing the operations for the brewery side of the company. So that's my sweet spot, and that's what I love to do. So
as I said to you earlier, the man with the secret sauce. So here's the secret recipe. Where does now? How did your passion for craft brewing come about? I mean, what's been your relationship with beer through your life?
Well, I mean, I think it really stemmed from my early days in college, like many people. It's
a lot of first-hand research.
I grew up in BC on the West Coast, and out there the craft beer scene sort of hit a lot sooner than it did out here. So in 94, 92, 93. When I was of age, there was good craft beer out there. There was Shaftesbury. There was really interesting things. So I grew up with that, and then I was working in a dairy, doing all the CIP, which is the cleaning place, all the operations of cleaning, sanitizing tanks. I was also making cottage cheese and yogurt, and so a light went off in my head after about a year of doing that I was lactose intolerant. And I was spending all my money on beer. And I was like, wait, how about I make beer and I'll get unlimited amounts of beer, and then I can buy cheese whenever I want it. And so from there, I finished my night shift and I volunteered in a local brewery.
Okay. What was that local brewery?
Spinnaker's.
Okay.
So Spinnaker's is in Victoria, BC. It was the first post-prohibition tied house brewery. So they opened up in '84. Awesome brewing heritage there. Some of the pioneers in Canada worked through there, and I was honored to be there for about 10 years.
So that's really where you served your apprenticeship.
I started there. My father was the actual brewer there at the time.
Okay.
So I sort of leveraged that relationship
Smart.
to get a job, and then he moved on to open up some other locations. And from there, did a mentorship program with a gentleman named of James Pryor, who was a brewmaster and director at Guinness, Bass, Guinness, and Whitbread throughout the 80s. Then the 90s, he worked in Russia setting up breweries. So he retired in Victoria, and so I sort of became his apprentice, you might say, while I was running a brewery. So really, in those days, a wonderful opportunity. And then through him, I worked doing consulting. I was able to go and work in Europe, setting up, bring over Canadian equipment, setting everything up, showing people how to run their business, make the beer. So really started young, and have been really blessed and thankful to be in the industry since '96.
We were having this discussion before about craft beer. The experience with the beer is such a personal thing.
Yeah.
And for me, the relationship is as much with the beer and the way it tastes as the people that stand behind it, and maybe what the brand represents, and you buy into all of that. What do you think Big Rig has come to represent. And I'm sure there's some people, whenever you hear of a craft brewery being taken over by a bigger company, that there's concerns that somehow maybe they're going to lose some of that identity.
Right.
What's the future of the Big Rig brand in this new relationship?
Yeah, totally fair question. One of the things that Foodtastic, when we were having our preliminary meetings, that's what I asked them. Why Big Rig? And it's because they love what we do and they love our brand. And so that's why I decided to stay, is because nothing changes. We got here because of what we did and what we've done and what we'll continue to do. So for me, my philosophy in beer, when we first started, people's palates maybe weren't as developed as they are now. So, we've got to make a little bit more broader range. And, our restaurants are 300 seats. We need to make sure that we're making beer that's is going to appeal to a lot of different people. So now that we've moved into that and moved along with the demographic of beer drinkers, they're more educated, so we can expand into more things. So for me, I've always, focused on quality. Using good ingredients, using, it's a bit of a cliche now, but time-honored traditions. These are things that I was taught by an old English brewmaster, and he was taught by the people who wrote all the manuals in the 30s and 40s. And that's not BS. It's about having respect for what you're doing and for your finished product, not cutting corners and doing things properly.
It's interesting to me too. Whenever I get the chance to experience a new brand, or just keep going through what an old one has established as kind of like their benchmark brews.
Yeah.
What was the strategy behind Big Rig? Like you said, you want to make sure that you've got those beers that are going to apply or at least appeal to a wide range of customer.
Yeah.
A lot of people find it difficult to kind of get into that craft beer space, and right away are like, it's almost like
it's
wine. It's like too much for me to try and figure out. What's been the strategy in terms of the types of brews that you had, and if that will change going forward?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I like to make beers that I can be proud of and I want to drink. So that's sort of level one, and it's important to me, and I like all sorts of beers.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not like, hey, I only drink hazy IPAs. Yeah. I love hazy IPAs, but sometimes I want a Pilsner. I want a nicely crafted 30-day Pilsner. Yeah. It's all over the map. For me, it's part of the experience of what you're having. So, having a core lineup that sort of hits those, there's sort of some tried, tested, true.
Yeah.
You've got your light, easy drinker, you've got your IPA, you've got your amber, you've got your brown, you've got your stout. That's history all over the States, and that's what people sort of open with.
Yeah.
And then to expand on that and to bring in new, interesting things over and above that has always been there. Moving forward, obviously looking at new markets. There are some beers that I make for the Ottawa area that sell like crazy. Yeah. But if I try to put that in London or in Toronto and in different marketplaces, it doesn't sell as well. So really, with today's market, I find that I need to make slight adjustments into even the microcosm of Ontario of doing that. So, if we're looking at, we're selling beer in other provinces now, but we're about to go into Quebec, obviously. So one of the things there is, okay, well, what is the consumer like there? What is the knowledge level? And now, I'm not going to say, look at, okay, what are the most popular beers and recreate it. It's like, where do we find ourselves in there? How do we want to build our name within those demographics? And I think that's just a realistic global view. If you go to Czech Republic, the IPA scene might not be as advanced as it is in, say, Nevada or in Ottawa even. So you really have to look at where you're going and make slight adjustments. And I don't think that that's pandering to the crowd. To me, that's a smart business. Right. And why not? If I can make every day a new style of beer, for that, to me, that's what it's all about. Waking up in the morning, thinking about the style of beer we want to make, figuring out the flavor profile, sourcing the ingredients, brewing it, and that satisfaction after it's all done, it's amazing.
I do a lot of golf stuff as well.
Yeah.
I cover a lot of golf, and a big thing is the way technology has come into golf, and how club fitting has become an important part of helping a golfer be better.
Right.
And the best club fitters rely on technology, but there's also an art to it.
Yeah.
And just like watching ball flight and everything else. And it's occurred to me in covering and being a little bit involved in the beer business that the best brewers kind of have that same kind of melding of technology and art.
Yeah.
And what for you is like the percentage? Obviously you have a recipe, you need to stick to the recipe, but there's that little bit of just, you have that little feel or instinct or whatever that just kind of takes it over the top.
Yeah, I you're bang on that. Like, I mean, there's a group of us here who do the recipe development now because it's part. I think it's one of the funnest parts of the job. So, like to spread it around. So we get together as a group and think about, hey, what do we want to do for seasonals?
Yeah.
And sort of throw around ideas. But it's really, at the end of the day, it's one thing to sort of, okay, I want it to be this color and this bitterness, and it's, you can hit those with math.
Yes.
But it's the nuances of the hops to the grain, and how you put it together in the different ratios, and how you're adjusting your processes to bring out the best in there. So, I mean, it's a lot of science. But at the end of the day, I sort of think about it as an Italian chef who has been making pasta, for 20, 30 years. It's like, your flour, your local water source, your tomatoes that your grandmother passed down to you, all those things, right? And the nuances within those. And that's really what when people ask me, what should I do to get in the industry? Get to know your ingredients and put them together, because once you have that, then you can put them together and you can really make something magical.
As a kid growing up in Quebec, everybody talked about the water, and like the Molson export that you have in Quebec was going to be different than the Molson export that you would have in Ontario.
Right.
And it's interesting that you talk about the ingredients. How big a role does water play, and where do you get your water here?
Well, we're lucky to have a great water source in the city of Ottawa. We obviously we filter it to sort of bring out, make it as neutral as possible, and then depending on the beer style, we'll add different salts in there. Okay. So calcium chloride or calcium sulfite, naturally occurring salts that are in our water. So within a few of those salts, we're able to push beer flavor in a different direction. So we can. Water records are one of the oldest records that you can find. So you can find wells from Eastern Europe through the 30s and 40s, and some of the beers that went through there, and you think, oh wow, I mean, that's a legendary beer style. Let's sort of strip the water down and then build it back up so it sort of matches somewhat of an old well.
Right.
So yeah, it's fun. It's fun. It's one of the fun aspects to play with.
The whole hop industry right now has been in the news quite a bit in terms of the demand that's been placed on that category by the explosion in the craft beer business.
For sure.
Maybe just walk us quickly through what you do. Where do you source your hops? What kind of relationships you have with the hop growers? Have we seen, even here in the Ottawa Valley, hop growers start to have an opportunity to make an imprint on the business?
Yeah, absolutely. Hops are always an ongoing part of what we're doing.
You say that with a bit of a...
Well, it's really tough. I mean, there's only so many different there's a ton of different varieties, and some of them are hot, like from year to year, and they're really difficult to get. And so really, you have to lean on your suppliers to sort of be able to get what's coming up, and having that relationship with them, like, hey, we've got this coming down the pipes, we only have X amount, so you want to be first on that list, right? And so it's one of those reciprocal supplier-customer relationships. When we get together, we're both buying each other beers. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
So for us, we make a bunch of beer, and so we're in a great position to be able to have really good hop contracts. And so we use a company called Hops Connect, and they sort of source stuff from all over the planet. And so we basically give them our volume estimates of what we're going to need for the coming years before the crops come out, and basically nail down those contracts. We're obviously held to use all those.
Sure.
But that allows us to have a little bit more purchasing power and work on the pricing. But that being said, there have been Ontario and in Quebec, in the valleys, it used to be a huge hop growing area.
Yeah.
So we've seen an emergence locally of new hop suppliers come up where they're starting with 3-4 acres and putting it through. Unfortunately, it's not the highest earning
Yes.
thing that you can do with your land.
Yep.
But I applaud the rejuvenation of that market for sure.
The legacy that you guys have created here at Big Rig in what, 7 years? I think you started in 2012. What would you like that to be? What we're talking about, that connection that beer lovers have as much with the beer as they do with the brand. What would you like people to think of when they think about Big Rig and your beers?
At the end of the day, I make beers because I love it. And I enjoy hanging out with friends and family, and I enjoy the beer and the time that we're doing with that. So really, to me, it's having a good time with friends and family, and for us to be a part of that is really cool,
Yeah.
right? If you're we work with TD Place, and so we're at the Ottawa Fury. If you're a soccer fan and your team scores and you're having a big rig, that's cool. Right? And if you can associate yourself with those great times, that to me is, I can be really proud of that. If somebody's having a great time and they're having our beer and we're part of that, it's cool. Yeah.
What do we have in Ontario now? 250 breweries? The numbers changing so quickly all the time.
Yep.
Where do you see Big Rig right now, kind of in that sphere of craft breweries in Ontario, and where do you think you could be because of this new relationship?
I can't. I couldn't even tell you. We're definitely the largest by volume brewery in Ottawa, by 3 or 4 times. And we distribute throughout Ontario and a couple other provinces. And so really, I'm just working on a couple of year growth plan, and I just keep going from there.
Yeah.
So there's obviously some bigger fish out there. With some great breweries like Bose and some of the other ones from Toronto.
Yep.
That make awesome beer, and in their markets they're huge. And expanding as well. So, we haven't been around as long as everybody, but we're definitely making tracks.
It was interesting what you said to me before about, people in communities really identifying with their craft breweries and the challenge sometimes that you have going from market to market. You even mentioned about, people here in Ottawa having their favorites from the Big Rig roster and having to adjust that different geographical regions of Canada. Do you think it's going to be tough for you to kind of transport that Big Rig brand to other markets? It
is definitely hard. And one of the things I love about this industry is that people are kind of protectionist about their own community. And so local breweries do better in their local areas. And so obviously, the goal is to not take away from their market share. It's about enhancing and bringing more people into craft beer. That's the way I look at it. There's only 8% of the population in Ontario, that's drinking craft beer, whereas in BC and Quebec, we're up over 10. So there's lots of room to move stuff up there. So really, there's an opportunity. to move stuff around. But you have to be cognizant of the local market and what you want to be perceived at in that market.
Like you say, where do you see craft beer going? Is that because some people feel like it's almost like there's too many craft breweries now for the number of people who consume, as you said, and that maybe we're going to see a whittling and a natural Darwinian culling of the herd. Do you see the opportunity there for craft beer to continue kind of on its upward ascent?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's not a lot of room for new steam whistles or new bows.
Right.
But there is lots of room for a place like Weatherhead in Perth or Brew Revolution that just opened in Stittsville, which are becoming the new meeting spots for communities. It used to be back in the day coffee shops, right? So now it's craft breweries, and so to have a craft brewery in different sort of local markets like that, you're going to bring more people into the marketplace. And those people aren't always going to be there. Sometimes they're going to be at Loblaws and they're going to pick up a Big Rig or one of the other great craft beers that are around. So really, I think that not all the business models are being able to support in the future, but there's different models coming up that are going to help out the marketplace. So.
Well, number one for me, if you've got a good product, it's going to find its niche no matter where you go. I think you guys have got a great lineup. Last question?
Okay.
What brands do you kind of use as like that flagship to say, we're here, we're Big Rig, try this? Like what are the ones you're going to push out there to maybe try and make inroads in other markets?
Yeah, we've got some of the beers that sort of lead the pack. Our Alpha Bomb. Yep. It's 6.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean it's 6.6%. It's got a ton of hops in it, but it's accessible, right? It's got big flavors, but it's balanced at the same time. So we'll usually lead with that, and then we'll bring in some of the supporting cast. Like our premium Pilsner. I love that beer. It's just well balanced. It's made
It's a good
properly.
multi-purpose, multi-occasion beer.
Yeah.
Good after hockey, good after golf in the summertime.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's and then having seasonal product out there is really important as well, and sort of doing new things. So yeah.
Maybe I said that was the last one. I'm going to ask one more. maybe give us a little hint about what we might see coming up on that seasonal menu.
Well, right now we've just launched we're coming into the fall. Mm-hmm. So we've got our Tales from the Patch Pumpkin Porter. So that's just in retail now, and that's a really cool one. We've actually got glow-in-the-dark ink on it, so that's really popular this time of year. And then we transition into our Midnight Kiss My Cow, which is a milk stout. Yep. So we put chocolate, cocoa, lactose, and so it's a big, rich beer for the holiday season. I've got some interesting things coming out for the spring that I'm not gonna divulge at this point in time, but stay tuned for sure.
Okay, great, Lon. Yeah. Thanks so much for being our first guest on Ottawa Craft Beer Insider.
Cheers.
And all the best. Looking forward to enjoying a lot of Big Rig over the holiday season.
Well, thanks for having me. Cheers.
Thank you.